Welcome to my moulding and casting dungeon. This is Lee Witcher from ABC, AtlantaBeatsCovid. Today I'm going to be showing you how to cast the N95 mask shells. Here are the shells. There are two parts. We have an outer shell. In here, along this groove here, sits a piece of filter material and a gasket, and then the inner shell sits inside and makes a nice filter sandwich, enabling you to breathe with a little bit of virus filtration, or hopefully a lot of it, 95% plus. Inside this groove here, in the inner shell, is the rubber seal that goes up against your face. But this is for another casting session, so we don't care about that. I'm going to give you a quick rundown on the moulding and casting station. This is how I have everything set up, ready to do a pour. You should strive for something similar. It's totally this tidy, always, promise. So here we have some pigment. We've got some fluorescent purple pigment here. We've got a tongue depressor that we're going to use as a mixing stick. Sorry, my tripod's getting caught on everything. We've got a little paper plate just to catch any drips. We've got our smooth on 16-ounce mixing cup. Here we have the resin itself, so we have a gallon kit of Smoothcast 300, part A and part B. We have some paper towel. We have our moulds. We have a little trash can, an old box I use. It's always really good to have something kind of hand level that you can just put straight into the trash can rather than dripping dregs of something all over your carpet. And then finally, the most important thing, even more important than the moulds, is baby wipes. And hopefully you will not have to find out why the hard way, so just trust me. You'll see that everything here is on parchment paper, just to help protect the desk a little bit, and to give you a kind of disposable covering. The final little thing which I'm going to show you is my rather verbose set of instructions that I'm going to go through now. First things first, you have to have a level mould platform. In this case, my desk is very level. If it's not, you will see the resin pour and it will be a nightmare to trim. In order to level the mould platform, you want to add some shims. You want to use a solid base, and the one thing you don't want to do is to shim the moulds themselves. So you'll see here that the mould is quite flexible, so if you were to put a shim under here, you probably can't perceive it, even if you were at the right angle, but the mould itself will bend a little, which will change the shape of the part. So you have to have a solid base which you shim. Okay, we're going to be moulding 2 mask sets in one go, which is 4 total moulds. You saw the two parts earlier, so here we have the moulds for the outer shell and the moulds for the inner shell. In order to get the right amount of plastic, we're going to pour 1 part each of part A and part B, 75 milliliters of each, totaling 150 ml. The reason why I haven't given you the imperial readings is because these smooth on cups, which are not the only things you can use, but they're my favourite one to pour from because they've got a bit of flex so you can make a spout. You'll see they have the metric markings here and they have the imperial markings, and 150 ml is slightly over 4 ounces. 4 ounces is the actual volume of those 4 moulds, and we always want to have a little bit extra. Next up, okay, so be ready to pour before final mix. No distractions. As soon as you mix, the resin's going to start curing and you're not going to have much time. So until part A and part B come together, you can chill out, have a whiskey, watch some Netflix, feed the cat, whatever you're going to do. But as soon as part A hits part B, you're in business, no distractions. You're going to mix for 30 seconds. max, because you only have 3 minutes before this stuff becomes too hard to pour, which leaves you around 2 minutes. You may be wondering why I didn't say 2.5 minutes. The reason is because as the resin is curing in the cup, it's becoming thicker the whole time, and actually the whole 3 minutes won't be available to us. So we want to move as quickly as possible. And I've actually figured out that these 4 molds are what you can realistically achieve in that 3 minute time. Okay, so you're going to make initial pours in each of the 4 molds, and then you're going to move on to the next mold to allow it to settle, to allow the resin to settle. So we're going to go around in kind of a circle, and we're going to let the resin naturally flood through. We're not going to try and correct one side that doesn't have any resin yet. And then we're going to come back around and make corrections however many times we need in the time available. The goal, the ultimate goal, is to have a slice pour. So this is what a slightly convex pour is. These kind of dashed areas here is if you were looking side on the groove. So kind of like from that angle. So you want the resin to be slightly convex coming out of that groove. Flat is possibly going to be okay. The problem is the material shrinks, and by the time it's finished curing, it'll look slightly dipped in. And also, if you've got any overpours, you won't have a reservoir of material to draw on, which is what this convex pour will give you. This is a definite no-go. If you start off with an underpour, a concave pour, it's definitely going to be a rejected part at the end. So this is what you want to strive for. Right as you feel like it's about to kind of burst out of the groove, and then stop. Final note is to think of the trim. We're not only casting the parts, but we also have to trim the parts. And okay, so now we're going to go through how to actually prep for the pour. First off, we're going to take our smooth on part B. You could do part A, just one of them really. And we're going to pour to 75 milliliters. Okay. Little drop more. Little note here. You've got to get your eye right down to the level of the markings on the cup. Otherwise you're going to get an angle error that is called parallax error. And we need to be pretty accurate with this stuff. And we're actually, see the instinct, I grabbed the part A, but actually we're not going to pour the part A straight away, because the biggest takeaway message that you need from this step is once you mix part A and part B, the pour has to start. You don't have much time to work with, so as soon as A meets B, you're on the way. So we need to have everything moved out of the way, our feng shui fully aligned before we mix A and B. So as part of that, actually I'm going to move this paper plate over here. We're going to get a little bit of pigment on the mixing stick. Now this stuff goes a long way. So I've just got scrapings of pigment on here, and you'll see how far that goes. So that's on the stick ready. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rest this on its cup there, just so we're ready to go. Okay, so here goes. I've moved everything into a little bit better of position to be able to get the camera angles right for this. Forgot to mention earlier as well that we're possibly going to see air bubbles, therefore we want something sharp. For this I've got a little screwdriver. You can also use the end of a X-Acto knife, or anything sharp really. Hopefully we don't need it, but it's good to have it there just in case. So here goes. This is where it gets real. Okay, we've got 75 ml of part B in the cup. Here goes the part A. Pouring up to 150 ml. There we go, cap straight back on. Keep the humidity out. Stirring stick in. Right, giving it a vigorous stir. We're going in one direction only. The last thing we want to do is add air bubbles. Air bubbles get trapped in the mold. So if we fold this resin back up on itself somehow, it's going to add air bubbles. I just switched direction there, but let's hope for the best. I'm going to scrape the sides. I'm going to go into the corners, and we're probably at about 20-30 seconds now, so I'm going to scrape off the stick onto the plate, get that out of the way, get my big pot out of the way, and here goes. Let's just move you a little bit. Okay, so as I said earlier, we're just going to start a pour. We're pouring onto this ledge here. I'm going to just pull up a little bit. The stream gets a little thinner as you pull up. I'm going round that ledge. Just doing a rough pour. Going to go on to the next one. Again, a rough pour. With these outer shell molds, the one I'm pouring right now, those stumps that cause the strap loops in the part are critical parts. You don't want to overflow onto those. We're moving to the inner shell now. On this one, we're going to pour straight into the groove. There's actually two grooves. There's the main groove on the outside, and then there's this inner groove. We're not going to try and pour into that inner groove. We're just going to do a rough pour, and we're going to give it some time to flow over into that inner groove. Onto the final mold. Trying to keep all our motions in one direction. We want to keep air bubbles out and air pockets out. We don't want to fold the resin back onto itself. Okay, so now let's look where we are. I've got two big old air bubbles here. Good job we had the screwdriver ready. I can feel the pot getting really hot now, so we haven't got much time. I'm looking at the stumps here. They're clear, and I see a slightly convex pour, so I'm going to leave that one alone. Here, stumps are also kind of clear, apart from there's a little bit on this one, so I'm going to try and save this. I'm going to scoop off, I'm going to kind of squeegee the resin off there. Now it doesn't matter if we have a little over pour, because we can peel that off after. I'm looking at these guys now. That's slightly flat, that pour, so I'm going to give it a little extra. Don't know if you can see in the video here, but it's a lot more viscous now, and there was something in the pot, so I'm going to get that out now. Pop that air bubble, pop that air bubble, pop those air bubbles. Look at the last one. Luckily, that last one is okay, because if you see, it is all going all opaque now. That's how quickly this stuff cures, and you'll see this on the inner shells more quickly than you will on the outer shells. That's because there's more mass, and the thermal properties of more mass means that it's more likely to cure, or well, it will cure more quickly. So I'm just going to try and pop that bubble there. Okay, we got that, and there's nothing more you can do at this stage. This, you know, it's largely set now, so we just have to sit back and wait. But folks, that is how fast things happen. A couple of notes. Overpouring, as I mentioned earlier, on this one over here. I know from experience that this area here is going to be really thin overpour, so we'll be able to just kind of peel that off and cut that off afterwards, so I'm not too worried. The big things that are hard to solve in the trimming process are these stumps. I mentioned the stumps as I was going along. If you overpour onto the stumps, if it's too thick, you just won't be able to recover the pour. and you just have to sacrifice that part. That will happen. You just have to live with it and get better over time. Actually, you'll notice on this part here, you can't even see this stump here anymore. So I'll be surprised if we can recover this part. But you know, we'll see. There is a case to say at some point, if you over pour too much, that we actually can squeegee the part. So if to squeegee the part, you would get your mixing stick and kind of drag it across the mold and then drag excess material out. You could do it with that mixing stick. I actually have a bread cutter, like a metal bread cutter that I sometimes use. It's somewhere around here. But the problem with that method is that you could only do it when the resin is freshly mixed. If you leave it for 90 seconds, 2 minutes, it's just too thick, and you will scrape, and the viscosity will drag the material out of the mold, and then you'll end up with an underpour. So a lot of this is judgment and practice, and just really comparing what you get out of the mold with what you need to achieve, and learning how to mold over time. So there's only so much I can do in video form, I'm afraid, but you can see that they're curing up quite nicely now, and we're going to give it 20 minutes. The spec sheet says 15 minutes, but I like to give it a few more, and then we're going to pull them out. So there we go.
20 minutes later.
Just kidding, my phone ran out of memory and I lost the whole video of me trimming those purple parts. So we're going to take this opportunity to actually do another pour. So I'm going to skip all the steps, the prep steps, and we're just going to go again. We've got 75 ml of part B. We've got some orange pigment, fluorescent orange this time, and we're going to dump 75 ml of part A in there, 150 ml total. Mixing stick in. Vigorous stir. Who loves orange soda? Kel loves orange soda. Is it true? Uh-huh. I do. Scrape the sides. Oh, got some resin on my hand. Don't really want it on there, so baby wipe. Boom. In the trash. Told you. Gonna get this out of the way. Start the pour. Here goes. Pouring onto that ledge. We're doing a quick rough pour, and we'll correct later. Oh, I have over poured that quite significantly. I'm going to be a little bit more careful on this one, or at least try to. Rough pour. Okay. Rough pour again. We're pouring into that ledge. Just going to aim slightly at that inner groove. I know I said we wanted to bleed in, which we do, but I want to help it a little bit. Same again. You can see it rush round. It's still pretty thin right now, but I can feel it by the second thickening up. Okay, so we're going to go back to the first one. This is most definitely over poured, so we're going to give the... See how much material's just flooded off there? That's looking pretty good now. Just going to give it a little bit, a real thin pour in there, because we just made it flat and we actually want it slightly over. This one over here is also looking a little flat, so we're going to give it a little more, tiny bit more. These guys over here, these guys, they look pretty good. This one's actually a little flat, so I'm going to give it a little extra. This one's slight overpour. We're going to risk this. It's a bit late to do this, but we're going to do it. Get that squeegee, see how much material's come off there. So now we're going to check for air bubbles. See an air bubble here. It's so viscous now it doesn't want to pop. I see one here. I'm just going to like squeegee that screwdriver as I'm here. Do not see this retracted a little.
20 minutes later.
Okay, so fast forward 20 minutes, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look in our cup just to make sure everything's cured. Light's doing some funky stuff, sorry. One of the most satisfying things you can do in this life is to squeeze the cup a little and then pull everything out in one go. This is the power of the resin. Got a small amount left. It shows that we had a good volume prediction to start with, 150 ml. Cup's pretty much empty, which means we can reuse that. Let's have a quick look at the molds. Look where we squeegeed. Lost a lot of material there. That's because we overpoured a lot of material. Things look relatively good. I'm worried about this top left one. Let's demold that. So we're gonna peel away the sides from everything. Silicone does not want to stick to anything, even itself. So it's really easy to push this out. Now, we want to get these strap hole stumps removed from the part without breaking them, so we push directly down until it pops out. Now look, that overpour was so thin, it's come off completely separately as its own part, and where we've squeegeed we get some thin stuff here. This is a real pain to clean, so this is one of the reasons we want to avoid squeegeeing, although the fact that there's residue on the top there is not that big a deal because this is not part of the part. So here's the outer shell part itself. Got a little bit of flashing in those holes, but nothing that can't be trimmed out with an X-Acto knife. That one's a little bit more full, but as you can see, easily removed with an X-Acto knife. This front part looks bad, but if we poke it through from the back, we can just cut that out. That needs another little trim, but we'll leave this one for now. All this flashing around here can just be peeled off, or it can be scraped off with a knife. Go into the second outer shell part. Our stumps are pretty clear on these on this one. Probably just run an X-Acto around that a little bit to chamfer it a little bit. We've got a little bit in the nose here. Just pop that out. Let's look at the inner shell. It's nice and clean. The grooves are fully formed on the inside. No damage. These edges are rough around here. We'll get to that in a sec. Okay, so let's talk about trimming. We're going to need a couple of tools for trimming. First is an X-Acto knife or a heavy-duty extendable blade knife, and then a pair of scissors, or something else, a knife that has a thick, rigid blade that we're going to use to kind of scrape or carve the edges. So when we come to the trimming process, we have the outer shell, which is going to have the action of clearing the strap holes. So that's pretty self-explanatory. We want to make sure that we can get the elastic through those straps, so we've got to clear those holes. That's probably the hardest part, and if we've done the pour correctly, then we won't need to do that. But if we have over pour like in the last video, then that's going to have to happen, and we're going to at least have to give it a go. And then on both the shells, then we need to chamfer the inner and outer edges on the open mold faces only. So if I pull out the earlier part, the finished part, that is this inner edge and that outer edge, and then the corresponding edges for the outer mold, outer shell, this inner and the outer edge. And so you may be asking what a chamfer is. Well, if we look at this little diagram here, a chamfer basically means wherever you have an edge, in this case I've drawn a right angle edge, and we're taking this corner off at round about 45 degrees. It really doesn't matter. It's just to take that edge off, and so it'll look like this afterwards, this angle here. In reality, this 90-degree edge won't exist when you have overpour. It'll be more like blah, 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 blah. You know, scientific description there. But basically, a really horrible overpour. We're going to peel off or cut off the majority of the excess, and then we're gonna drag the scissor blade over to give us that nice edge. And then we're going to obviously check that we don't have any damage or deformities. We need to make sure that there is a consistent pour throughout, that the grooves got fully filled, and also that the inner shell can actually fit nicely in the outer shell with no resistance. And then the final point here is this process is a lot easier when we demold after 20 minutes. So even though the spec sheet says that the cure time is 15-20 minutes, actually it's going to take, you know, overnight, 12 hours or so to reach full rigidity. And so ideally we would trim now as we demold, because the material is more pliable. After a day or so, it's a lot more rigid and a lot harder to get rid of the overpour and chamfer the edges. So that's at least our aspirational goal. So let's check out the molds. Okay, let's have a quick look at finishing the parts. This is crucial to make sure that the inner seal fits inside the outer seal. If we do a quick test here, look, that just won't go in there right now. And that's just because there's so much flashing around here. So my technique is to get a pair of scissors, thick blade, and we just go around that inside to start with, kind of scraping. Keep the knife at a shallow angle, keep the scissors at a shallow angle. And just chamfer that inner edge. Now, of course, that's just the inner edge. We need to get the outer edge too. So I'm kind of just scraping, really. This Smooth Cast 300 sands and carves really easy, so we can get rid of all of these features really easy. And you can see that chamfer appearing there. Don't go over the top. We don't want to jeopardize the part, and we also don't want to damage the kind of surfaces. We don't want it to look bad. The longer we spend on these parts, the more chance we have of scoring it. So now you see that goes in there so easily. It wants to spring out. There you go. So you don't want any impedance on the inner shell going into the outer shell. It needs to go in with no resistance. Okay, so now let's look at the outer shell. Here we go. Now, because this is the outer shell, this is what you're looking at when it's on someone's face. So this is really an aesthetic part. So it's not super critical that it fits inside something like the last part. So we're going to go around, we're going to break off all the big bits. There's a little bit in that strap hole. Get the big bits off, and then we're going to use the same scissors technique to chamfer those edges, just so it doesn't look like a monstrous part. Even took off a fairly big chunk of flash in there. That's really smooth already. Just break that edge, chamfer that edge. Make sure it looks like something you'd want to put on your head. Just a little bit on the outside there. Okay, outside looks good, so we move to the inside. I just slipped there a little bit. Every time you slip, you're increasing the chances of you making a cut in the part, which is something you want to avoid. So you want to do the minimum to get these parts trimmed up while still making them look good. So you see we've just taken the edge off on the inside there. Got a little score on here because I slipped, and a little score over here because I slipped. That's not enough to reject this part, but we just make sure these